Hello and welcome, everybody. We are going to do a brief, abbreviated version of chapter number 12 on arousal regulation. This, for my class that's listening to this, will be very specific to what you're going to need to know for your third exam. I've kind of taken out a lot of the non-essential concepts. I've tried to focus on the concepts that I want to inquire about in that exam. But I'm also giving you a little bit of background information beforehand because it's hard to get to those concepts without having a little bit of understanding. So without any further ado, let's keep this one short and sweet and let's go from the beginning. So we already had a chapter where we talked about physiological arousal and how it plays a role in sport. Now we're going to talk about how to manipulate that, how to make that work for you, especially if you can't get yourself where you need to be in order to have the best performance, either in the gym or out on the field. So first we're going to talk about self-awareness of arousal. You need to increase your awareness of your psychological states before you can control your thoughts and feelings. So before you can control how your thoughts and feelings go, you need to actually look to see what exactly you're thinking in the first place. So you need to be aware of what's happening with you in the mind. Now, once you are aware of what your optimal arousal level is, so at what point is the tipping point? What point are you most focused? What time are you in the zone, as they like to say, where you're firing on all cylinders and you're living your best life, you're doing your best work? Once you figure out where that is, you can then begin to regulate it. So whether that's reducing it, maintaining it, inducing it, getting you up to that spot, and that's really what the goal is here. Now, here's something about, because we've talked about arousal and anxiety, and there's a fine line between the two. Anxiety is not such a great thing, and it does creep into our lives. However, how individuals cope with anxiety and cope with arousal is more important than how much anxiety they experience. So it's not about how much. It's really kind of hard to quantify anyway. It's how you perceive it, how you are able to deal with it most effectively. So that's what we're going to talk about today, are just a couple of ways of maybe finding ways to cope or modify the amount of anxiety or arousal that you're experiencing. Here's a great quote from famous basketball coach Jack Donahue, and it goes a little something like this. It's not a case of getting rid of the butterflies. It's a question of getting them to fly in formation. Now that's great because we've talked about butterflies, we've talked about that adrenaline, that rush before you take the field, and it is perfectly normal to have butterflies. Usually when people talk about having butterflies before they perform, that is a telltale sign of arousal. That means that you are amped up. Your body is physically stimulated to the point that you're going into action. Now, if they feel out of control, that's going to lead to some probably performance issues. And that's probably a sign of hyper arousal, too much arousal, and then it's chaos. If you have no butterflies at all, then you're not really focused enough to do your best work, so that's not good either. So it's a matter of getting those butterflies in control, of having them fly in formation so that you can have that optimal level of arousal, which leads to your optimal athletic performance. And here's an interesting little fact right here. Compared to non-elite athletes, elite athletes see their anxiety as facilitative rather than debilitative. So what that means here in the context of this quote is that the best athletes have learned how to get those butterflies to fly in formation. In fact, they look for them to start flying and flapping around because that drives them to better performance, rather than someone who is a non-elite athlete, when they feel butterflies and they don't know what that feeling means or how to control it, well, then they see that as debilitating, as a way to kind of take away from their performance. Key difference there. So how we regulate this is crucial, which is what our topic is here today. So we'll look at a few different reducing techniques. I've really shaved the list down, but there are somatic anxiety reduction techniques, cognitive anxiety reduction techniques, and then multimodal anxiety reduction packages. So we'll briefly talk about each. So some somatic anxiety reduction techniques. These are things that actually, when you guys, if you move on into the bachelor's program here at Kaiser and you take the stress management course with me, we actually go through a lot of these somatic anxiety reduction techniques. We kind of did one when we did guided imagery in class a couple of weeks ago as a way of inducing some relaxation, especially if you're feeling stressed. But another technique here is called progressive relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation. Just so you know what that is, it is a way of learning to feel how much tension is in your muscles and then how to let go of the tension. The way it works is you will focus on specific muscles in your body. You will contract them forcefully, like as hard as you can, and then relax them. And what you're going to be doing as that's happening is focusing on the sensation of how that relaxation feels in comparison with the contraction of the muscle. And in doing so, you'll start to kind of realize how your body should feel. A lot of times we carry a lot of tension in our muscles when we are stressed or when our anxiety or our arousal level is high, and we don't really pay attention to that because our mind is racing. This is a way of kind of focusing in on some of those physiological happenings and controlling them. And when the muscles relax, you'll find that the mind actually relaxes with it. So that's one. Another here is breath control, and there are a lot of different breathing activities that you can do. And one of the things that you'll notice is that when someone is under pressure or pretty tensed up, their breathing gets very shortened, shallow. They're not filling their lungs with all that oxygen, irregular, so you're not getting your normal respiration rate. It's all out of whack. When you're calm, confident, and in control, breathing takes on a more smooth, deep, rhythmic state. This is more optimal for performance, and there's actually ways of engaging in just breathing activities and breath control activities that can actually help to facilitate a more calm state, which again leaves you in more control and lets you do some of your best work. Biofeedback. There are some devices and things that you can learn, that you can use to just measure some phenomena going on inside your body. Allows you to become a little bit more aware of your autonomic nervous system and learn how to control physiologic and autonomic responses by receiving physiological feedback not normally available. So you might get some electrodes that indicate that sometimes something is high, and you can then focus in on some of the things that might be causing that, reduce them in your head, and you'll see how they actually start to come down. So that's what biofeedback is. It's not something you'll have a lot of access to, but just worth mentioning here in these somatic anxiety reduction techniques. Now we'll talk about cognitive anxiety reduction techniques. So these are things that you are doing exclusively within the mind. Relaxation response teaches individuals to quiet the mind, concentrate, and reduce muscle tension by applying the elements of meditation. There are a lot of different meditation practices out there. Some are tied with religious elements, some are not. You can probably just pull one up from YouTube or from some podcast site, something along those lines. Those are things that you can use, and they are great. They focus your mind to just do different things. So you're not doing anything with the body here like you would for somatic techniques. Instead, this is exclusively going on in your mind, and it will help to calm your mind. Another technique here, and I'm providing a secondary link because I've actually done a recording of how to do some autogenic training. And what's interesting about this one is it creates some physiological responses in the sense that you can feel them almost somatically, but you're not actually moving or doing anything. It's just you're concentrating your mind on different parts of your body and manipulating how warm muscles feel or how heavy parts of your body feel, and just by concentrating on them and in theory directing the flow of blood from the core of your body where a lot of your blood is maintained and moving it out peripherally to some other areas where they might be carrying some tension, and this is a great one. and I want you to listen to it, and I'm going to ask you to report back on it and see how you feel about it. So when you're done listening to this, just go do that. And look, this is something that it's, yeah, it's homework because I want to talk about it, but I want you to do it because I want you to feel how it feels. And it's 16 minutes of your day. It's well spent. It's something that you'll be able to use again if you like. So this way you can maybe feel a little bit better. And if you want to reduce your stress, like you can just put it on whenever you want. So listen to it. Spend that time. It should be fun. It should be fruitful. Cognitive anxiety reduction. It's something called systematic desensitization. Aims to reduce anxiety responses to stimuli, so whatever makes you anxious, by trying to have a response antagonistic to anxiety at the same time of the anxiety-provoking stimuli. So just getting you numb to what it means. So introducing it maybe in small amounts and then in larger amounts and letting you kind of interact with it in ways where you're able to reduce your anxiety, where it does not cause that same kind of response that causes your arousal to fly off the charts to the point where you can't focus and you might be having a panic attack. It is just a method where we introduce it and then heighten the volume on it essentially so that it can you can just get used to it. And then when you're used to it, you don't react negatively to it anymore. And this one here, multimodal anxiety reduction packages, things like cognitive, affective, stress management training. So again, thoughts and feelings for cognitive and affective, that's what they're referring to. Teaches a person specific integrated coping responses using relaxation and cognitive components to control emotional arousal. So that's what that third one is. We are really not going to spend any other time on it. We'll talk hypnosis briefly, only really because it is interesting. And one of the things I want you to know is that this is not the same as like when you go to a carnival or some party and they have a hypnotist there and it's some big show and part of the trick. That is a work, as we would say in the wrestling business. That is not how it's done. It's not a real thing. You can't hypnotize someone like that. But what hypnosis actually is as a real technique is it is an altered state of consciousness that can be induced by a procedure. So someone actually has to go through training and learn how to do this with someone, in which the person becomes into a very unusually relaxed state. So it's like a state of hyper relaxation. And they also then become more responsive to suggestions. And these suggestions are designed to alter perceptions, feelings, thoughts, and actions. It is not the nonsense you see on TV. Okay, and no one can be hypnotized that does not want to be hypnotized, is not willing to be hypnotized and be put into this state of unusual levels of relaxation. It's something that clinical psychologists become trained to do, and it's interesting, it's real, but it's not the way you think it is based on what you've seen on television. Some facts here. Although researchers and practitioners don't always agree on the definition of hypnosis, they do generally agree about some of these aspects when it comes to hypnosis. And they're this. The more open individuals are to receiving suggestions, the more likely they are to benefit from these suggestions given under hypnosis. So like I said, you can't be hypnotized if you don't want to be. And the more willing you are, the more open you are to suggestions, if you don't stay closed off to them, well, then this is a more helpful tactic. The deeper the trance, the more likely it is that the suggestions given under hypnosis will be effective. But again, you have to be really deep in this trance. You have to really be in this state of tremendous relaxation. You have to be open to it. And the hypnotist needs to be good. Go through a lot of training. It's not something that you can just learn to do and dangle a stopwatch and make it move in a pendulous motion left and right. It is far more sophisticated than that. Okay, so here I highlighted all in green. This is what your test questions come from. I wanted to share a couple of arousal management techniques with you first and tell you what really we're talking about in terms of how to cope. But now let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes and the things that are actually on the test that you need to focus on. Coping is a process of constantly changing cognitive and behavioral efforts, so what you think and what you do, in order to manage specific external or internal demands or conflicts that you see as stressful or beyond what you can normally deal with. So you have to change your thoughts and behaviors in order to deal effectively with stress, whether that are things that you're going to be dealing with in the world around you, or even with your thoughts inside. So that's the layman's way of describing that. Research really look at two different types of coping. They look at problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping, and they're two very different things, and I'm going to explain them to you now. So problem-focused coping is a concentration of efforts meant to alter or manage the problems that are causing stress. So these are things like time management, using problem-solving skills. There are things in the world around you that are causing you stress, that are making you have these negative emotions. And so problem-focused coping are finding ways of eliminating those, of changing them so that maybe now they will not be around to cause stress, or we'll make them so they are less likely to reduce stress. Okay, so that's problem-focused coping. Emotion-focused coping, on the other hand, is how you regulate your own internal emotional responses to a problem that causes stress. So these are some of these relaxation techniques and meditation techniques that we've talked about a little bit here earlier on. These are things that you can do to help regulate your own emotions and your own thoughts versus the problem-focused coping, which you are actually taking some kind of physical action more than likely to eliminate that stress or change it. If you can't change it and it's there, then instead you might want to work on changing your emotions, and that's where the emotion-focused coping comes from. Another thing here, seeking social support coping. This occurs when you turn to others for assistance and emotional support in times of stress. This really is a protective element when it comes to managing stress, having good, positive social support around you, having friends, loved ones, family. It doesn't matter who it is, but as long as you have a good, strong social network. And I don't mean social media, right? That social network, right? Not the same thing, because those people really aren't there. But this is really having people you can actually go to, call upon, sit with, etc. So some areas for problem-focused coping. Okay, so some major problem-focused categories. So things that you can do to deal with some issues that are problem-focused. Just gather more information about it. Come up with plans. So if it's a sport, you're talking pre-competition plans and competition plans. So laying out an actual game plan for those scenarios. Goal setting. A lot of times we don't bother to write down our goals, and we don't really know what we're going for. We don't take subjective things that we might say we want to do in our minds and make them objective, put real terms and parameters on them so we can use them. By doing so, you can actually help manage your problems a little bit better. And you can do that through time management, which is your next one here, or a number of other goal setting strategies. But time management is great. When we get back to class, I'm going to show you guys something that I am starting to use just to help manage my own time better. Just because you get older doesn't mean you get better at this sort of thing. Sometimes it takes constant work. So figure out what works for you and use it to your advantage. Problem solving. Just going through various ways of solving problems and finding numerous ways to attack it. Increasing effort, so just getting a little bit more motivation and getting yourself to the point where you can do more. Self-talk, don't talk negatively in your own mind to yourself, talk more positively. And in the case of like injured athletes, actually sticking with an injury rehabilitation program. These are all different problem-focused coping strategies, things that you can do. Again, focused on the problem and dealing with the problem itself, things that you can alter to maybe eliminate or reduce that problem and how much stress it causes you. On the emotional side, okay, so let's say we can't do something about what's around us. So we have to work inward. We have to look into ourselves, into our own minds and our own bodies, and figure out how we can generate a more relaxation response so we can get better control of our emotions. This is where we can use things like meditation or some of these other relaxation techniques. Wishful thinking, I don't know how much stake I'm going to put into that. That could be one that actually is not good, because wishful thinking without action or plan or goals doesn't really do much. Reappraisal. This is where you actually look more closely at your scenario. Sometimes you might think things are bad just because you only look at a couple elements of them, but if you go through a period of reappraisal where you think about it, you really write it down, you measure the pros and cons, you might be able to look at it a little bit differently and kind of reshape your thinking. Self-blame, mental or behavioral withdrawal. This is probably a more unhealthy emotion-focused coping strategy, but it's certainly one that exists and one that people will actually engage in. Doesn't make anything better for them, but it's there nonetheless. And then again, this kind of like the reappraisal, the cognitive efforts to change the meaning of the situation. So just rethinking about finding a new way of looking at the problems that you're having. So a kind of short summary of how to look at when you should use problem-focused coping versus emotion-focused coping. It's this. When stressful situations can be changed, and you need to make sure you recognize that too, because a lot of times the stresses that we have in our lives are things that we allow, things that we tolerate, that we put into our lives, and we have more control over them than we realize, but we just say that we don't, or we don't really think about it that way. But if it can be changed, well then problem-focused coping strategies are going to be most effective. Now, if you have a stress in your life that is just constant and it can't be changed and there's nothing that you can do about it, that's where you want to go into the emotion-focused coping strategies. That's where more meditation and more yoga, more exercise, right? Exercise can be something that is a stress reliever. It can help regulate emotions. These are ways to help deal with it when you can't really change them. You just need to kind of change how you feel on the inside. Okay, so that's the big difference between the two. Real quick before we close it out, just a thing on resiliency. So being resilient and bouncing back when things don't go your way. It's something that scientists and researchers have looked at because, especially in sports, participants need to effectively bounce back from adversity. And adversity comes in a number of different forms. It could be injury, it could be a poor performance, being cut from a team, which can be very discouraging. All right, these are all things that most athletes have experienced at some point in their lives, but someone that is resilient can bounce back from it. So not only do people survive these instances, but usually in the long term, you get better from it. You can gain some positive attributes. That's that whole what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? You might get knocked down, but it makes you smarter, it makes you tougher, it makes you wiser. So next time, you are better prepared. So they look at things like mental toughness and personal resources. So they'll try to measure commitment, determination, competitiveness. These are keys for building resiliency. And that resiliency will help performers deal with more adverse situations. There's a lot of things that affect this, a lot of things that come into play. Sociocultural influences like social support or lack of. I mean, we watched Rudy. He did not have good social support, at least not to start with. He had to find friends and find people, and he was so grateful for people that came into his life that helped him, and that made him more resilient. But he was tremendously resilient on his own, because even in the face of all those odds and all those people talking and working against him, he was able to find a way. Here's some advice and some things that world-class coaches do. These are what they do, and these are the last two things that we'll go through here before we call it a day on this. World-class coaches, what do they do to make sure that they stay world-class and succeed? Well, they structure and they plan. They plan ahead. They keep solid and good, effective communication with athletes, coaches, sometimes parents if that's the situation. They manage their time effectively. And again, these are all things that you can do. These are all like problem-focused coping strategies that you can utilize. Ask yourself, if you're not doing these things, what are some ways that I can do them better? And if you are coaching someone else, maybe you can take them through and help them find ways of reorganizing. Psychological skills, for them, they put things into perspective. They talk positively to themselves. They evaluate what's going on, and they help to control the things that are controllable. Okay, that's the biggest thing here. When it comes to stress, figure out what things you actually have control over and take control over them. And the things that you can't control, well, then you can't worry about them so much. You have to find other way. You have to move on or control your emotions in response to them. World-class coaches also have great support. And for you, surround yourself with supportive people. If people that tear you down, break you down, you need to get them out of your life somehow. Look for advice from other coaches and people that you trust. Find a mentor. Find people that you can trust and spend time with friends and family, the people that build you up. And finally, distractions, get rid of them. Take time off to do other things that you enjoy and exercise as well. Unnecessary distractions, I meant, but when it comes to distractions, you can't be all business all the time. You got to take some time to focus on some of the fun things and things that you objectively enjoy outside of work too, and good coaches will do that. Experience and learning, always get better, always learn more. You've never learned too much, you never know all of it. Use experiences as an athlete to help decision making. That's on the coaches. So think back to your time as an athlete. Draw on previous experience as a coach. Always learn. Always be a student. Always, always be a student. And finally, maintain your good relationships. Always make time for your people around you. Take the viewpoint of the others that are maybe underneath you and get to know everyone and foster that better communication. Guys, that's what I got for you. I wanted to keep it short, so we're at about 27 minutes and change here. I won't hold your time anymore. Good luck with using this. I hope it's been helpful for answering the questions on exam number 3. Have a wonderful weekend. I look forward to seeing all of you on Monday and listening to your presentation. So thanks, everybody.